help me welcome Dr. Stephen Park.
Thank you so much for this wonderfully hospitable day. It's just wonderful to be down here in Waco. And also I just have to pay tribute to my good friend Byron Johnson. And next to him is Jeff Levin. And of course Lee, who's Jeff's wonderful wife. And there are a few other folks I'm familiar with here, but it's been a wonderful trip thus far, and I've met so many great students in your Medical Humanities program. And you're charting some new territory, so I'm glad to be helpful in some way. I'm going to present some material on deeply forgetful people. And I'll tell you why I use that language. It's a different language than you're generally exposed to, but I'll explain. Question for all you youngsters. Do you want to live forever? No? Why not?
Not here. It would be boring.
It'd be boring. Okay, yeah, been there, done that. Okay. Anyone else? A quick response. Do you want to live forever? 70% of the budget of the National Institute on Aging is devoted to the basic science of aging. So they're studying, telomeres and all these kinds of things. And the idea is to make good on the original vision of biological science, which goes back to Francis Bacon. Some of you are familiar with Bacon's great classic, The New Atlantis. It's his utopian vision for biological sciences that he wrote in 1626. At the end of the book, there's a fountain of youth, which means basically the goal is to reverse aging, reverse it, and certainly to delay it. And there's some people these days who think that they're on the cusp of it. So I don't know about that. But this idea that Shub came up with just now that would get boring. If you look at The Lord of the Rings, most of you who have read the book or seen the movie, the elves, they live forever. And they can get killed in a battle, right? But they don't have natural death. And Tolkien really felt, he would agree with you, that without mortality, which is the mother of creativity, the mother of meaning, the turning over of the generations, because that's how we develop as a species in terms of compassion and other regarding virtues. Without that, we are nothing. We are just dust. And remember Arwen? So Arwen trades her listless immortality for what? For love. And she's not talking about love of chocolate or designer jeans. She's talking about something much deeper, and I think that you can appreciate that. So do you want to live forever? Some years ago, at the University of Pennsylvania Museum of Archaeology, we had a massive conference with all kinds of great scientists from different fields, and also theologians and philosophers. And it was called The Fountain of Youth, Cultural, Scientific, and Ethical Perspectives on a Biomedical Goal. It was fabulous. And of course, we came out with a volume of, this is the cover of it. And it started a major field of study. People really beginning to reflect deeply on this goal. Is it a good goal? Now, Jonathan Swift wrote Gulliver's Travels exactly a century after Francis Bacon's New Atlantis. And Swift, he did not think that anti-aging was the way to go. He felt that you would just really have not a compression of morbidity, squeezing out all the morbidities of old age that even Byron and I feel at times, but an expansion of morbidity. So Gulliver travels among all kinds of strange peoples, and some of you have read Gulliver's Travels. He comes among the Lugnavians. The Lebagians are really interesting. Every once in a while, among the Lebagians, someone is born and they have a pink dot on their forehead. Looks a little bit Hindu. And they will live forever. They are called Struldbrugs in the language of the Lebagians, which simply means immortals. Now here you go, a quote from Gulliver's Travels. They are despised and hated by all sorts of people. When one of them is born, it is reckoned ominous, and their birth is recorded very particularly. So no one's celebrating. And then Gulliver says, they were the most mortifying sight I ever beheld. And the women, sorry about this, but he wrote it, more horrible than the men. Don't want to trigger anything, but I'm just being honest in text. Now, at first, Gulliver was so excited. If I could live forever, I could be creative endlessly. And by the way, this was one of Thomas Aquinas' major arguments for immortality. Because he thought, if you could be immortal, what kind of a loving God would give us all this creative capacity and cut it short? So therefore, we must have the eternal life. And that was one of his 3 or 4 major arguments. So Gulliver says, my keen appetite for the perpetuity of life much abated, because now he saw this protraction of morbidity, not its compression. And the king of the Struldbrugs says to Gulliver, take a few of these folks back to your own country to arm people against the fear of death. And my medical students, they have this feeling when they go to the intensive care unit on a bad day, and they see perhaps 3 or 4 or 5 people with severe dementia moaning into the open air, and they wonder, how did this happen? How did they get there? That's a big dilemma. We'll talk a little bit about it. So this is my favorite illustration of Struldbrugs. This is from my childhood copy of Gulliver's Travels. And you see, they don't look too great. Now, let's talk about dementia. Would an aging society look like a Struldbrug's world? Or would we have the compression and morbidity? Some people believe we would have. A century ago in the US, dementia, meaning a decline from a former mental state, was mainly secondary to syphilis. It was a problem of neurosyphilis, because dementia is not a disease. Some of you probably get confused about that. Dementia is not a disease. Dementia is a syndrome, or technically, in terms of philosophy of science, it's a collection of symptoms caused by many diseases. So you can have Parkinson's, you can have multi-infarct dementia, little stroke events in the white matter of the brain. You can have chronic traumatic encephalitis, kind of thing I got when I was a high school kid in New Hampshire, hitting my head on the boards playing hockey. And actually, most neurologists nowadays don't think that you ever quite get a clear diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. They think it's mixed. So it's a mixture of things, and that's why you've seen one case. It's really hard to be terribly predictive. So now that people are living longer, and we have antibiotics, age itself has become the strongest predictor of these diseases of old age. What is Alzheimer's disease? Alzheimer himself did not believe he had discovered a disease that was foisted on him by his boss, Forgetful. He thought it would be great if Alois had something named after him. But he didn't. He thought he had just discovered a normal aspect of the aging brain that we would all succumb to if we lived long enough. I more or less agree with that. Today, there are 5 million Americans living with probable Alzheimer's disease. You have about 3% at age 65, and it doubles every 5 years. So it just increases. Now, it was thought, 15 or 20 years ago, that if you got to be 80 or 85 and you didn't succumb to dementia, that you were over the hump and you were free, you were home free. But then they started studying people in their late 90s, and it turns out that about 60% of those individuals have probable Alzheimer's disease. So that suggests that maybe Alzheimer was right that this is just an inevitable part of growing very, very old. So, hallelujah, have a good day. In the African American population, there's a higher incidence than in the Caucasian population. We don't quite know why, but some people think that it's due to pollutants. Lead is one suspect. Diet, apolipoprotein B4, which is a particular variant of a genetic mutation that does not cause the disease, but it creates susceptibility, and stress. I have to say something about this. So 15 years ago, I went to a conference of leading neuroscientists at Berkeley, and I was surprised because every one of them, this was up on the hill where they have that incredible bell tower, every one of them, they'd come around and they'd say, you know, stress, protracted stress, is causal. It's one of 6 or 7 causalities for Alzheimer's disease. Because the first marker of Alzheimer's disease is the shrinkage of the hippocampus. And that's the part of the brain that lays down short-term memories. So I've known many people with Alzheimer's disease who they actually remember perfectly well who they are, whose they are, but they can't go shopping. Of course, they can try to write down a list of things, but that grows very awkward for them because their short-term memory has failed, but their longer-term memory is there, their sense of who they are. Again, it may be fading, but they have a feeling of their self-identity, and they can relate very well to symbols. So their linear rationality may be limited. The sort of how-to means ends rationality, getting from point A to point B. But the more important rationality is symbolic rationality, the rationality of relating to a symbol that you identify with over the course of your life, and that's the rationality of who you are. I'll give you some examples of that as we go on. In Japan, the life expectancy is 88 plus, and they have the highest numbers. 14% of the population has probable Alzheimer's disease. It's incredible. And they're not reproducing much over there. So they just don't quite know what to do. My wife, Mitsuko, is from Kyoto, and I spent a summer in Japan out among the rice farmers talking with them about a practice that I obviously disapprove of, but this is Asia, and it's based on Confucian values. Right? And the key value among Confucian ethics is filial piety. It's more than honor thy father and thy mother, which you all get from the Bible, but it actually goes beyond that. It's really almost a worship of the parent, and there are all sorts of studies that are going on about this. And so in a culture that's pan-Confucianist, because all of Asia is pan-Confucianist, the fact that in certain sections of Japan, that people with parents who have deep forgetfulness would get in the practice of bringing them, when the moon is full, and it's midnight, out on the tatami mat, say a prayer, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo or whatever, and then bury their face in a bowl of water until dead. There's a documentary about this called The Promise. So I went around Japan with my wife and interviewed all these people and wrote an article about it called The Promise. And that was meandering. Okay. But it was very important to get that down and recognize that the pressures of caregiving in a culture of such high incidence of dementia can even break down the most significant moral standards. This, of course, brings up all kinds of questions of intergenerational justice and age-based rationing, which Daniel Callahan, a very famous bioethicist and founder of the Hastings Center, championed. He wrote a book called Setting Limits. And of course, back then, that was in 1985, in England, they were not treating anybody over the age of 65 with dialysis. Because they said, well, you're too old. Of course, age, Dr. Levitt mentioned, is not a good predictor of anything, right? Bob Binstock, who was a very well-known gerontologist, and I did a book called Too Old for Healthcare, ? And we had C. Everett Koop. Ed Koop was the Surgeon General under Reagan. Ed Koop wrote the foreword to it. And he said, I'm glad these people have written this book because I disagree with Callahan. I'm 68 and I just had a very successful open heart surgery. He was living on his farm up in Dartmouth. And I agree with them that we cannot discriminate against people simply on the basis of age. But there's pressure in that direction. And every once in a while you'll see proposals, right, in policy literature. Maybe we can just get rid of the old folks. I don't think we can do that ethically, but it's tempting. And intergenerational justice, how do we balance the needs of young people and old people? Of course, in an aging society where you have a protraction of morbidity, you're going to be spending so much of your resources on older folks, and that really is a problem, but I don't think rationing is the answer. So who is this young lady? This is Jean Calment, who defines the human lifespan. Now, lifespan is different than life expectancy. Life expectancy differs in every country based on all kinds of factors, genetics, diet, exercise, and so forth. The lifespan is the longest that any known representative of a species has lived. So what's the human lifespan? Anyone want to give a try at that? 120? Oh,
Spain?
Yeah, it is 120, and she lived to be 122. The interesting story about this woman is that when she was in her 80s, she thought, maybe my time is growing short. So she had a villa in the suburbs of Paris. And she sold it to a lawyer, a very fancy, wealthy lawyer, for a ton of money. And he resented that figure, but then she said, just pay me till I die. So I'm not sure why she's smiling here, but I think maybe she's smiling because she's the best real estate in history. And he actually died of stress induced illnesses, and his kids had to make payments for 15 years. So I'm attributing that, I'm sure. But she does look pretty happy. Okay. But that's the lifespan, and that's different than expectancy. Life expectancy in the U.S. is about, for women, it's probably, 85, 86, 87. For men, it's a little lower. So I asked you a first question, do you want to live forever? And I hope I added a little bit of debate to it. The second question, do you hold hypercognitive values? Hypercognitive. Highly cognitive values. It's a phrase that I actually coined at the Case Medical School on the 4th floor years ago, and it's not caught on. There are conferences all over the world on the errors of hypercognitive thinking. This is a flyer from Portland, Oregon, Alzheimer's Association. I think, therefore, it's a little bit of a misplay on Descartes, but I think, therefore, if I don't think, I am not. Okay. And that's how a lot of, I say this with some respect, Western philosophical thought runs. If you think about John Locke in the second treatise on government, personhood has to do with agency, of course, right? Your ability to carry out practices and plans, to project plans forward into the future and operationalize them. And this is how Kant defined moral agency. And the problem is that if that's how you think about the value of human life, we're in big trouble. The Germans were all extremely adept philosophically. Among the early Nazi party in the 1920s, the most highly represented profession, the doctors. And then close behind them, the nurses. There are now books being written about the Nazi nurses. And why is that? Because borrowing from Cold Spring Harbor, and even Henry Ford, when Hitler was writing Mein Kampf, he was a clearly anti-Semitic figure. He coined language like life unworthy of life. useless eaters. And this became part of the Nazi ideology. So in 1939, there was a program called Tiergestrasse 4, T4. What was it? It only lasted a year and a half. They took people who were deeply forgetful, and they were Aryans. They were not Jewish, they were not gypsies. I should use a little different word for that, but they were not Polish Catholics, they were not homosexuals, they were not among any of the groups that were systematically discriminated against and executed at times. But these people were just, regular blue-blooded Aryans, and they had one thing going against them: they were deeply forgetful. And what happened? So in T4, 70,000 individuals were taken out of asylums. And these were people with a mixture of cognitive developmental disabilities, but also dementias caused by various conditions. And that's where hypothermia research got its start. So these were people who were then frozen to death. They were put in vats of water. They were made to lay out in the snow until dead, and then they were brought into these asylums and they were warmed up at different temperatures and different gradients, hot air, water, and so forth. And I directly attribute this to Western philosophies of rational personhood. You only have moral status, protected moral status, under the great God Almighty if you are cognitively intact. And I find that to be unacceptable. Dr. Leo Alexander was a neurologist at Tufts University in Boston. And he was an Army medic, and he was the first one to really discover the depth of the atrocities in the camps at Dachau and Auschwitz. So Leo Alexander recorded all this, and he wrote this article, Medical Science Under Dictatorship. And he said, ultimately what we need to do to protect these populations is to have voluntary associations. Richard Newhouse would agree with that. In other words, there have to be entities between the population in general and the state that have a special commitment of their passionaries about the well-being of a particular vulnerable community. It could be ALS, it could be Alzheimer's, it could be spina bifida, you name it. But that's what he said you need. That's the solution. And most of my career, I've been devoted to certain of these groups. I've worked a lot with the Association for Retarded Citizens and a lot of word retarded, the Alzheimer's Association, ALS. I've been very much involved with these organizations, and my work has been responsive to the voices of caregivers and affected individuals directly. I never just wanted to write for other philosophers, people or theologians. I wanted to do something that was really rooted and grounded. So, moral considerability. This was a time of racial hygienics. At Nuremberg, as some of you know, 11 doctors were hung. Of course, the Tuskegee trials in the US also perpetrated under the auspices of the government, the CDC. Nobody was tried, nobody was punished. We just didn't think that it could happen here. And Fred Gray, who was on the board of the law school at Case Western, I was on the board with him for a few years. He was Martin Luther King's lawyer. And he settled, Fred Gray, he was a great human being, he was a Morehouse graduate. He settled the Tuskegee cases for those families. You know how much he got for each family? This will shock you, $25,000. I mean, today, these are people who died of neurosyphilis that was untreatable or untreated even after penicillin came along in the early 40s. So in that sense, I mean, I'm a great respecter of public health, but we have to understand that a lot of the people who were involved in this were the greatest advocates of public health. Public health can go wrong. It can create a very unethical outcome. So you have to be careful. Someone says, well, this is public health. Respect them, but also take it critically too. This is the famous Victor Brock, who was killed at Nuremberg, who was hung at Nuremberg in 1948, and Leo Alexander was the one who actually wrote the Nuremberg Code. It was amazing, and I was introduced to him by my great mentor Joseph Michael Foley, who was a famous neurologist who had been the chair at Harvard and came to Case Western, was the chair there, and he was always going back and forth to Boston. And we once went when Leo was still alive, and that was one of the most powerful moments in my career. I said hypothermia, super cold. This is a hypothermia event. They're taking here a deeply forgetful person, and they're putting them nice to work until dead. By the way, the Nazis said they had a justification for this. They said they wanted to know at what point it would become futile to send rescue teams into the cold waves of the North Atlantic when submarines had imploded or pilots had gone down. Obviously, completely unacceptable. But there you have it. That's a gruesome picture. And let's not kid ourselves. It is gruesome. It's something to process. And I have mixed feelings at times about showing it, but it's powerful. And, you know, I've been a disability ethics person for a long time. Bioethics and disability advocacy are very, very different things. A lot of bioethics is focused on the principle of autonomy. And it's individual autonomy. But if you look at disability studies and the great disability ethicists like Eva Kittay, who founded founded feminist ethics of care in most respects, a philosopher whose daughter was born with severe cognitive impairment and is still alive. You know, it was a turning point in her life. She almost quit philosophy. But she became, of course, one of the most distinguished philosophers of her generation and was a member of our center for many years. And in this book, Learning from My Daughter, the value and care of disabled minds, she really lays it all out. So this is something to think about, that the reconciliation between disability and bioethics is not full right now. We had a conference once, a national conference for the Association for Retarded Citizens for ARC, way, way back in like 1990 in Case Western, and there were tons of people there. And Wolfensberg came down from Syracuse, New York, and he'd been a witness to the Holocaust. And he said, flat out to my face as I was giving an opening set of comments, he said, all of you bioethicists are Nazis. I don't want you to be hesitant to join the field, but I'm just telling you that there are these realities out there, and they need to be straight. These are the challenges, the real challenges. So question 3, why the expression deeply forgetful, not dementia? Dementia is a completely negative term. It simply captures a decline from a former mental state. It's often used derisively. By the way, I wish politicians would quit calling their adversaries demented. They have to stop that, you know. It's horrifying. It's similar in structure to the word retard. Deeply forgetful for me is a term of inclusivity. There's a fellow I know from Michigan State University who started using that term first, and I borrowed it from him and attributed it to him. But deeply forgetful people, it's a term of greater inclusivity. So I don't know how you folks are, but my memory is sometimes not as good as it once was. And I had an experience in the medical school. I went behind in the parking lot, and I couldn't remember where I parked my car. But even worse, I couldn't even remember if I'd driven to work. Which, by the way, David Tracy came into the Swift Hall in Chicago one day, and we were all sitting there having coffee, and he said, does anyone know if I drove? We just cracked up. So these medical students, she cracked up, and she said, I'm not sure. But it turns out that I had, I found my car. So diagnostically, it's okay to forget where you parked your car, but it's not great if you forget that you're not parked your car. Just FYI. But it's a term of inclusivity because we all have our moments. And deeply forgetful almost has a mystical quality to it. And if you look at the history of world spiritualities, there's something about forgetting about the temporal self, moving from chronos to kairos, from chronological time to sacred time. And there is a kind of mystical forgetfulness involved in that. So I like deeply forgetful because it is that kind of inclusive term. And underneath that veil of silence or chaos, you can actually have a full identity, a full human person. That's one of my core understandings that I've arrived at over the years. Mind and self-identity can be present, but you have to look at, there's an evangelical Christian book called God Winks. Has anyone heard of that? It's a great, just, you have to notice, you have to learn to be a noticer. And that's what I encourage everybody to notice, these winks of continuing self-identity. And I find that they're usually there. One of my best mentors in life, Pastor Otis Moss, the Olivet Institutional Baptist Church in Greater Cleveland, he speaks about this, so I can do so too. His sister passed away in Detroit about 1.5 years ago from probable Alzheimer's disease. And we talked a lot on the phone. And I said, so Pastor Moss, you're with her now, how's she doing? And he said, well, she's quiet. Then I asked Pastor Moss, well, do you think she's still there? And he says, well, I'm not sure, because as far as I'm concerned, she may be down at the Amtrak station with one foot on that train for glory. So he thought maybe his sister was ahead of it. He didn't diminish her value, he didn't demean her. He thought maybe she was ahead of the game. And maybe she was. Who knows? So dignity for deeply forgetful people. And as Byron and Jeff know, we did a Gallup study on the experience that primary and secondary and professional caregivers have had with these experiences of lucidity. Here's a vignette. Here's the lucidity vignette. This was from one of my medical students who's now at Johns Hopkins in psychiatry. It was in his last moments that my mother seemed to be rewarded for all her hard work. My grandfather looked at my mother and spoke to her with complete lucidity for the first time in a year. He talked about the old times when he used to walk to school. Then he talked about me and told her to make sure I kept working hard in school. And the last thing he said was how proud he was of her and that he loved her. The next morning he was gone. That's the moment of lucidity. Here's another one from Kathy Chapin, who runs a wonderful nursing home in London, Ontario, just over the Lake Erie from Cleveland. I spent 3 hours yesterday afternoon with my sister, and I tried to make sure that every facial expression and tone of my voice, the intentionality of my focus, was positive and loving. I didn't understand a word she said, but it didn't matter. I felt love by being loving, and Wendy felt love by receiving my love. At the end of our visit, she said, I want you to stay with me always. That's being open to surprises. There's a nice book out now, Positive Psychology Approaches to Dementia, how all of the values of positive psychology, kindness, humility, cultural humility too, forgiveness, all these things can play into the lives of caregivers and be very effective. We're beginning to measure this quite well. This is a little study from Rush Presbyterian Hospital in Chicago with older adults who took a purpose of life scale. The high quartile in purpose had a lower rate of cognitive decline than the lower quartile. And they also eventually would have lower levels of Alzheimer's disease. So there's something about focusing the mind on a positive purpose. Most of these purposes were pro-social. They were about helping identifiable constituencies, volunteering for meaningful purposes. And when you do that, you tap into something that's very animating and very important in the human spirit. So I'm open-minded about these things. I'm not trying to present one perspective, but there's a famous philosopher who spent probably 30 years at Princeton, Thomas Nagel, is now at NYU. He wrote a book called Mind and Cosmos. Subtitle, Why the Materialist Neo-Darwinian Conception of Nature is almost certainly false. So he doesn't think that mind is derived from matter. It's like saying you can't get blood out of stone. They're just so different. And many philosophers of mind take that position. Now, I acknowledge that there are probably a dozen theories put forward by neuroscientists, and they're respectable scientists, trying to show that you actually could get to mind from matter. But at least Nagel doesn't think you do, and I don't think so either. Now, Vernon, Ohio, it's right in the middle of Ohio, and there's a geriatric psychiatric institute there. And one whole wing of that institute is for people with Down syndrome who have gotten into their 50s, and they also typically have Alzheimer's disease. So the family members really struggle with that because they've taken rightful pride in every developmental threshold reached. Now they see development in reverse. And these individuals typically will have a lot of behavioral problems as well. So Joe Foley, the neurologist, and I were visiting Mount Vernon. And we noticed, it's about midday, these incredible nurses' aides who were just, when they walked into the room and everybody quieted down. It was miraculous. It was celestial. All these people with the dual diagnosis quieted down. And we just, but you know what, you could also see palpably their facial expression, their attention to details. The tone of their voice was beautiful. So we took a couple of them out to a pizza place in Gambier, Ohio. We asked them, so what motivates you? What makes you do this? I mean, it's the middle of Ohio. You wouldn't think there would be a Hindu community of nurses' aides, but they were there for a purpose. They had a higher purpose in this. They were really purpose-driven people. And they said to us, namaste. What's namaste mean? Anybody want to try that? It's a Hindu greeting in India. It means, I honor the divine in you, right? Namaste. You know that. You ladies know that. Okay. I hope you know that. Maybe you don't. Yeah. I mean, a little longer version of it is Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. I honor the divine in you. It's in Japanese. But that's what they said. And they left it at that. And we didn't need to go any further because what happened was that their spirituality and their ethics were one, totally one. They were going to acknowledge the infinite value of the human soul underlying these challenges in communication and behavior, but still there was consciousness. I had a great experience once in India. I went to Bangalore to the Indian Institute for Advanced Studies, and we did a whole conference with about 200 philosophers and neuroscientists, a couple of them from the US, but not many. And it was about deeply forgetful people. And I was giving my take on this, that if you take a hyper-rationalist perspective, there's no solution to this problem. And so there was a little noise in the back of the conference center, and I squinted, and it was the Dalai Lama. And he comes to Bangalore from time to time. He likes the airport, by the way. Designed and owned by Prem Watsa, Sir John's buddy. So we'll get to that later. But he was ecstatic, and he stood up and he put his hand on the table and he said, "You're perfectly correct. There's no compelling reason to honor the life of somebody who is memory impaired less than someone who is not memory impaired. And that's like point one in all of this discussion. You have to just love humanity, and memory comes and goes. It can be stronger or weaker, but you can't rule people out of our protective umbrellas on that basis. So that was very interesting. And this is a letter from His Holiness. An excessive focus on materialism and the neglect of spiritual values such as love, compassion, and generosity have, I believe, prevented us from realizing our potential as a human society. While technological and scientific advancements have contributed to a better quality of life for many, the lack of attention to our inner lives is reflected in the persistent and pervasive emotional troubles and the growing social, economic, and ideological divides at the root of so many of the problems afflicting us today. And then he goes on, and he says some things about my wife's husband, addressing consciousness and being forgetful and that sort of thing. But it's nice. So a couple of vignettes. Jim. So Jim grew up in a Christian household in northeastern Ohio near, what was the name of that town? Not too far from Mesopotamia, Ohio. That's not the one. There is a Mesopotamia. And there's a nursing home there called Chardon. The town is Chardon. The nursing home is called Heather Hill. So Joe Foley and I went out to Heather Hill one day. And they had a special care unit for people who were deeply forgetful. And we read the little bio sketch on the wall about a fellow named Jim, who was a resident in this unit. He said that he had a couple of sons, Luke and Jake, and a little bit about his life. He'd been an accountant. And so Joe and I went out into the main ambulatory area, and we asked the nurse, "Can you point out Jim to us?" So we went over to Jim, and I took Jim by the arm, and we sat down. And I made a mistake. I said, "Jim, how are your sons?" And he got so nervous, and obviously totally anxious about this situation, because by using that kind of open-ended language, I was forcing him to come up with those names himself, which he couldn't do. And it was frustrating for him. But then when I said, "Jim, how's Luke?" he lit up like a Christmas tree, because I was using language to prompt him, to cue him. And there are whole books written about how to use language among deeply forgetful people. The best one is by Danny Rickich, R-I-P-P-I-C-H, who's our colleague at Case Western for many years. So he knew who he was, and he had a twig in his hand. It was a white painted twig without any sharp edges. And he put it in my hands. And when he smiled this glorious smile. It was so warm and so compelling. And then I handed the twig back to him. And I went up to the nurse a little later and I said, "So what's with Jim's twig?" And she said, "Well, he grew up and he loved his father very much. His father gave him a chore in the morning, which was to bring kindling in for the fireplace." So that's what I mean by symbolic rationality. Okay, he was not going to go out to Stop and Shop and go shopping, or Kroger's, or whatever you have here. But he somehow knew that his journey in life, his identity, was wrapped up in this twig. And that's something to always remember, because linear rationality is not morally important, despite what everybody says. It really isn't. The rationality is a source of self-identity that really matters. It's who we are that matters more than how we proceed. Clint lived. He was a Clevelander. He worked in the steel factories on the west side of the Cuyahoga River, and he became quite severely deeply forgetful. And even to the end of his life, he would cling on to his cowboy hat and even take a shower with it. They'd have to wring it out, and you couldn't get it away from him. And the amazing thing about Clint was that he always dressed country and western, and somehow. Maybe he knew about Lefty, a fellow Clevelander, Pancho and Lefty. But he somehow, he just knew that he was wrapped up. That was his story. His narrative was wrapped up in that symbol. And that's really important to note. And you can use, that's why pastoral care can be very effective So at Yale, in the divinity school, there was a great New Testament exegete, and his wife became severely, deeply forgetful, and she was really lost. She couldn't converse, but she'd go to the chapel service there. And when she was informed and shaped by the hymns, by the windows that's shining, and by just the prayer, she would chime in to the Lord's Prayer. She would become joyful, and then after the service, she would actually talk with old friends, like normal. And she could do that 5 to 10 minutes. And it's quite amazing. So this happens not infrequently. And I see people who are at the very end point in Alzheimer's progression praying the rosary. I've actually done focus groups on that with their families. So it's not as though they're necessarily gone, but you have to know how to use language and symbols. Those are your tools. Language and symbols. Remember I said that, language and symbols. I was doing a talk for the New York Alzheimer's chapter once upon a time. And I guess this was 2013. And I was talking about these themes. And this woman, Olivia Hobelzell, has written a famous book called 10,000 Joys and 10,000 Sorrows. The being a caregiver is not always a burden. Well, that's the only language you hear. It can be a joy. It was a joy for her. So she emailed me the next day and she said, in that late stage when words are gone, except for those very occasional moments, she, my mother, looked at me intently and said forcefully, God, physics, and the cosmos. She was a physicist at MIT. So there was still something there, and that's what we have to recognize. We have to be humble, culturally humble, in the world of the deeply forgetful. And I'm happy to say that the National Institute of Aging took a lot of the stuff that I've been writing for many years about lucidity, episodes of lucidity. I don't like the word paradoxical, I use the word unexpected. And they actually put out a request for proposals. So this is what it said. A new funding opportunity. Research may uncover novel mechanisms underlying cognitive decline. Identify potential preventive or therapeutic approaches. And offer more effective strategies for caregivers. That's what we're trying to get at. And perhaps even expand our understanding of the nature of personhood and consciousness. Isn't that powerful? And so this is really catching on. People take it very seriously. And and the people at the NIA are, they tend to be fairly skeptical. So getting this across with them was not a simple thing. What hypercognitive philosophies fail to notice? Creativity. People with dementia can be intensely creative. Musically, artistically, they have symbolic rationality, they can express emotion, they have relationality, including the international Alzheimer's dog movement. Music and rhythm, they can be somatic, and that brings them back into their memory of self. Beauty and awe, they can love the color of the fall leaves. Smell, taste, that McDonald's apple pie can remind them of Grandma's place. Touch, consciousness, continuity, self-identity. So why is it that we use the word dementia? Because that just means that they're a husk, a shell, empty, gone, dead. We need to completely reverse that. Music can be very important. I'm not going to get into music in memory, but I recommend that you go to a website called Music in Memory and take a look at Henry. So this is de Kooning. De Kooning was an abstract expressionist who is basically capturing what W.H. Auden called the age of anxiety. And we do live in an age of anxiety. I mean, I go to the psychiatric emergency units most weekends in the evenings just to check it out. And, the amount of division, polarization, hatred in our environment, in our culture right now in America, a land we all love, it's over the top. And people are feeling that. It actually affects them emotionally. So de Kooning was an early bird in this regard. And he would stand out in front of the Café Wa in Greenwich Village and get in fist fights and pit fights. He was always anxious. And one of my good friends, Norm Relkin at Cornell Medical School, who runs the Memory Disorders Center, he diagnosed de Kooning. De Kooning had probable Alzheimer's disease. Again, it's a mixed diagnosis. So you've seen one case, you've seen one case. For 14 years, de Kooning lived in a loft off Bleecker Street, and he had one assistant who just sort of helped him with, getting a shower and things like that. And he would sit in a chair, he couldn't move him. He would be wearing his dungarees, his painter's dungarees, and he couldn't get anything else on because he could see the yellow streaks of paint. He knew that was him. And then he would just sporadically rise up and put his brush in acrylic paint, and he'd go up to the easel and he would paint. And there was a posthumous exhibit of his work back there. 14 years. That's the later de Kooning. So the art critics, they pandered. Most of them said in the New Yorker, well, he's a husk of his former self. This is an embarrassment. Where's his intensity? It's gone. And there was one reviewer who I thought really hit it on the head. She said, wait a minute, this is a guy who had probable Alzheimer's disease for 14 years. And for 13 and a half of those years, he knew who he was and he painted. And I think that's something to be proud of and delighted in. And there's so much you can do with art and dementia. That's why I say their creativity is always there. It's not the linear rationality, but it's the symbolic rationality that allows them to be creative. I was one of the founders of the Alzheimer's art movements in 1998, 1999. And it was a wonderful case that we witnessed of a guy who would come into the Foley Elder Healthcare Center. And he'd get out from the van. He lived in Shaker Heights, Ohio. And he had his black crayon and his pad of paper. And he would just scrawl stuff that looked crazy. But there were always two lines in parallel down the middle of the page. And we would ask him in the morning, so what is that? His name was Luke. I said, what is that? He couldn't respond. Then one morning, this is about being open to surprises. This is moments of lucidity. I said, so what is that? He looked at me and said, that is a map for my daughter to find her way to my house. So, and I'm not being silly about this. I mean, this is the truth. Alzheimer's dogs. So I was on the board of Alzheimer's Scotland for a while, and we decided that everybody with dementia deserved a nice, friendly, well-trained, mid-sized Labrador service dog. And we got that to happen. And so now, if you're in Australia, you get dogs for dementia. It's all over the world. This is an email I got from a woman in Brooklyn. And she says, thank you for founding the Dementia Dog Book. Bringing Lola to see Alzheimer's patients has made a tremendous difference in helping me open up the line of communication. You notice your dog doesn't get a hoot if your memory's a little bit faded. Have you noticed? That's why there's such good examples of, at least canine love, right? And they don't care too much about your behavior. They give you some slack. So a lot of the strengths of positive psychology can be found in narrative with dogs. Take Marvin. He's 91. He lives at home with his wife. He has advanced AD. He has a full-time aide and sleeps in his own room while his wife sleeps in the master bedroom. Marvin had walked into her bedroom and fell asleep in the bed since the morning. The aide and his wife couldn't get him up. I walked into the room with Lola, put her paws on him, and said, Marvin, get up. Look who's coming to visit. Marvin popped up excited to see Lola. I was able to lure him out of bed and into the family room where his wife was. He couldn't contain his excitement. His wife and the aide couldn't believe it. Lola had brought back his memory of his dog, Sparky. So this is happening all over the world. I mean, the Australian thing is incredible. We had a conference on Alzheimer's in dogs with Australia Alzheimer's. We had about 100 people who were very delighted with their little dogs. And they had vests that had forget-me-not flowers on them and so forth. We walked down the main drag in Sydney toward the hospital of New South Wales. And these people were really very happy. I mean, the dogs didn't give a hoot that they were not memory intact. So everything was fine. And this cab driver drove up. And he said to me, "What's this? Service dogs are for blind people." So we're trying to kind of change that. And there are so many anecdotal accounts of this. So what am I asking you to think about? What is hope in caring for deeply forgetful people? This is what our Gallup stuff is all about. Being open to surprises. Being open to surprises. Never stop being open to surprises. I know there are other ways of thinking about hope in other conditions, but being open to surprises and noticing hints, whispers of continuity of selfhood. And it is my opinion. There's a passage from St. Paul, nothing can separate us from the love of God. And I would just add, not even deep forgetfulness. You've heard me say that. So you go back to 1993, 94, everybody's raving about a world without Alzheimer's. They think we're going to find that magic bullet. We never have. I'm not going to talk about the available drugs and failure of pharmacological goals because nobody really understands the basic science of most of these conditions. And this is an NIH statement. There's no evidence of even moderate scientific quality to support the association of any modifiable factor, nutrition, herbs, dietary, prescription or non-prescription drugs, social economic factors, and so forth, with reduced risk of Alzheimer's disease. But I do have a prescription. I'm not a doctor, an MD, but I'll give you what you have to let me get away with this, okay? I would suggest do a Mediterranean diet, because there's pretty good evidence about that. It's not overwhelming, but it's pretty good. Lots of green salads and fruits. Exercise, just a half an hour a day, you find that in the literature now. And not at a super brisk pace, just like you're going to a restaurant. Social and intellectual engagement, so when you walk to the restaurant, go with friends. Walk peacefully with friends to a Greek restaurant and then play poker on the way home. It's not bad. Meditation. Meditation now is recognized universally as helpful in this area because it's the protracted stress that causes significant atrophy, as I mentioned. And so the best association for Alzheimer's prevention is located, of course, in Phoenix, Arizona, and it's run by an MD. He's a Sikh, Dharma Khalsa, but it's really made a lot of progress around the world. And I would also say cherish nature. Don't just cherish nature. Cherish the gift of nature. Because if you'll ever notice when people are doing prayer or meditation or whatever, there's usually wind chimes, and maybe there's a little bit of water flowing off a stone somewhere. So there's something about nature that frees us from the anxiety and the stress of the world we live in this age of anxiety. And you can breathe deep, and you can pray, and you can meditate. And it's pretty good for your hippocampus. I'm not going to go on further. These are just practical issues. If I had another day, I would. But just to talk about bias, pain. Up until 2000, I would see people with Alzheimer's disease screaming in hospitals with a tube in every orifice, natural and unnatural. And everybody would say, well, it's just the dementia. They're just confused. It's just the dementia. It's not that they have underlying osteoarthritis, which many of them do, So then, fortunately, we did a lot of studies on pain and being forgetful. And now people, I'm going to skip through this. People talk a lot about pain AD scales. Everybody in Alzheimer's care is trained in how to pick up the hints of pain. And it's been very successful. So you're using pain medications in this population in a way that was not the case earlier. And this is a pain AD scale, I'm not going to go through it, but it's pretty easy to use. So we began, we talked about Francis Bacon and Jonathan Swift. This is an Irish ferry in Dublin Harbor, and it's called the Jonathan Swift. And I was in at Trinity College giving the annual Jonathan Swift lectures on deep forgetfulness. He is my patron saint of the deeply forgetful. I love Jonathan Swift. Ironically, he spent the last 7 years of his life with a probable diagnosis of what historians now think of was Alzheimer's disease. And he was kind of, in the corner of St. Patrick's Cathedral there, and he had a housekeeper, controversially, who took care of him. But he took all the 10,000 pounds that he earned from Gulliver's Travels. That was a lot of money back then. And he built St. Patrick's Hospital. And he devoted it to people with mental illness and also with dementia. And the inside of this ferry, it's about the size of this, the cabin is about the size of this room, was just completely covered with these beautiful inscriptions about St. Patrick's Hospital. And he quoted the Sermon on the Mount in his will. He said there are 3 things that are important for these people. Number 1, don't torture them, because at an asylum in London, that's what they were doing. That's Bedlam. The word Bedlam came out actually from Bethel, Bethel Hospital. People would come in and they'd pay a few pence, and they would poke deeply forgetful individuals or people with mental illness. They would throw hard objects at them. And this was all based on good science, right? Because researchers were saying at the time that this was a disease of bodily fluid flow and its retardation. And so if you jab someone with the end of a stick, not to bleed them, but just to prod them, this would somehow get their flow back in motion. And Gulliver, Sir John Swift, who was on the board of Bethel, resisted this. He thought it was a terrible idea. So he quoted the Sermon on the Mount, and do no harm and do no violence. He also said that anybody who comes to St. Patrick's has to have a family in the vicinity of Dublin, so that they can come and visit and pray with their loved ones. Because that prayer is so important. That's one of the ways you communicate with these folks. And he also said it had to be built in the vicinity of a good medical hospital. And it was built about 3 blocks away from the Hospital of Dublin, which is now the Museum of Dublin. And all across Ireland, there are satellites of St. Patrick's Hospital. And of course, they use hospice care, and they use all these wonderful techniques linguistically and symbolically of making a world for the deeply forgetful. So that's Jonathan Swift. Thank you.